Good morning. The time has come for you to get the credit you deserve. The last ad-click model has served us well for the last 10 years, but the industry is ready for a new reporting standard. Engagement mapping is the emerging standard for crediting conversions. John Chandler will be taking us through an overview of engagement mapping and explain the concept, technology, and strategic implications for publishers. If you have any questions throughout this morning's presentation, please use the instant message feature on the right side control panel, and we'll try to answer as many as we can get to at the end of the presentation. I'm now going to pass things over to Atlas Institute Principal Analyst John Chandler for your inside look at engagement mapping and an exclusive pre-launch preview of Microsoft's Engagement ROI solution.
Hi everybody, this is John here. So what we're going to talk about today is basically a new and emerging standard for conversion attribution on the web. And I'm going to take a moment to talk about the current standard that we have, just to kind of set the stage. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the research that Atlas has done that's kind of led us up to this point of working on a new standard. And as we go along through that, I'll kind of highlight the pieces of research that are really important for you publishers kind of looking at this and working with it. And then the next sort of thing that we'll talk about is what this standard is and kind of what it incorporates. So again, before I get started, let's just kind of set the stage by talking a little bit about what our current standard is. So right now, when an advertiser places a campaign online, ads are shown to users, and through cookies they're tracked, and some of those ads are clicked on, and then ultimately we hope the consumer ends up at an advertiser's web page and purchases something, say. So when we see somebody hit that sales page, we look backwards through their history and we look for the most recent ad that was either clicked on or viewed, and then that ad gets 100% of the credit. So that's kind of the last ad standard. Now let's imagine for just a second, and I'm going to start working through the presentation now, that we are offline marketers. So if you're an offline marketer, and again, let's say, taking off your publisher hat, putting on your advertiser hat, you're advertising for Bud, right? And you want to see what's working. And in order to do that, one thing you might do is you might go into bars and look and see how people are kind of getting to the bar and the messaging they're receiving and what happens before they order a beer. So imagine that you're crouched up in the rafters of some bar with your little notebook, and you're watching people walk down the street. They walk past this neon Bud on tap sign. They kind of glance at it. They go sit down at the bar and they order a Bud. And you write down, oh, saw neon, bought Budweiser. Well, that's one sort of piece of data. But if you only gathered that kind of information, then what would be the sort of conclusions you'd draw? You'd end up buying tons of neon. You'd drop your TV advertising. The Clydesdales would be out of work. It wouldn't be a very efficient sort of marketing scheme. The problem with that is that's a little bit like what we've actually done online. In the offline world, there's a fundamental marketing concept called the sort of the sales funnel. And at the top of that funnel, you're building awareness. At the bottom of that funnel, you're sort of getting somebody to finish a purchase. The neon sign is something that might be at the bottom of that funnel. It's right at the point of sale. TV is something that builds awareness. And historically, in the online world, we haven't really thought about that very much. And one of the problems we have with that last ad model that I described is that it only looks at things that are sort of at the bottom of that funnel. So to make this a little bit more concrete, imagine now that we've got, so on this slide here we have 5 converters, and what we have is a little piece of marketing, and that's what's in that circle there, that piece of media that reached the person right before they converted, and the conversion is that C in the black square. Right now, this is the way that advertisers view the media that you're basically putting out there. So if you were the last ad, you get 100% of the credit. If you were anything other than the last ad, seen or clicked on, then you're going to get 0 credit. The reality now is much more complicated. Campaigns are reaching consumers across multiple times, multiple channels, and they're extended periods of time. With the rise of broadband, people are surfing much more than ever before. They're exposed to many more messages. There's high quality, reach that's going to people who ultimately do, purchase on an advertiser's webpage, but those ads are receiving none of the credit. So again, the situation is much more complicated than when the last ad standard was created. So now I'm going to walk through a little bit of research. Just one sort of piece of information here is that we've got a whole bunch of white papers on our webpage. It's atlassolutions.com. There's a little link for Atlas Institute, and inside of that are a bunch of digital marketing insights. So everything I'm going to talk about here is pulled out in a lot more detail there. Most of those insights are a little bit more advertiser-facing, but sort of useful information. I think you'll see that that there's going to be more research kind of that's focused on publishers coming out in the near future. So again, atlassolutions.com, and then you can get a lot more detail on all the stuff I'm going to talk about. So the first piece is this analysis called sort of cross-channel interactions. And just to tell you kind of what's going on there, imagine somebody types in to a search bar, say, Nike basketball shoes. So they type that in, and then they click on a paid Nike link, go to Nike's webpage, and buy a pair of shoes. So right now, that ad, that paid search link, is going to get all of the credit. What we did is we took a look at people who were reached by display advertising, so banners and rich media, that kind of thing, before they clicked on the search term. So imagine there's sort of two groups of people: those who click on search terms who were never shown any display media, and those who were shown a display impression before they clicked on the search term. And the key insight is that there was 22% lift for the group that was shown a display impression first. So you got the advertiser was getting 22% more sales when they showed a display impression to somebody before they clicked on a search term. Under the current strategy, the current way of attributing conversions, that display impression gets 0 credit, even though it's contributing. The sort of key insight here is that display impressions, they deserve an assist, sort of, for using a sports analogy, for many of those conversions. And it's not fair that they get 0 credit. And so that's one thing that engagement mapping is really trying to do, is trying to attribute the conversion in a more fair way, so that a display impression that is part of a user's history will receive the credit. Again, the search click, super valuable point. As you can see from the chart, that the search conversion rate is very high, but that display impression is giving some lift, and so we want to take that into account. So it's just a more intelligent way to sort of holistically look at a user's history. So the next sort of piece of research that kind of led us down this path, and it's funny when you talk about this stuff, we sort of view it. We look backwards through all of our research and kind of put these things together. When we're doing the research, we don't really see it happening. And when we started looking into cross-site duplication, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there wasn't a lot of cross-site duplication. So, the reach that you had as a publisher might have overlapped with the reach that another publisher has. I mean, you look at AOL and Yahoo, and maybe they have 35% overlap or something. But for an advertiser who's reaching people via a campaign, there really wasn't a lot of overlap. And so we started looking into this. Again, 5 years ago, not a lot of overlap. Last year, when we published this research, the story was very different. And what we saw was that rather than the occasional cookie being reached across multiple sites, it was actually very common for people to be reached not only on 1 or 2 sites, but 3, 4, and 5 sites. And so, overall, across all of the advertisers we looked at, about 1/3 of the reach came on multiple sites, but 2/3 of the conversions did. And actually, for large advertisers, the numbers were much higher. So if you think of somebody doing a really big campaign, a lot of time, they had 50% of their reach was overlapped, and 90% of their conversions were coming from users across multiple sites, and the frequency was much higher. Now, if you go to our website and read this research, what you're going to see is you're going to see us sort of talking to advertisers about how to kind of manage this and what it means for brand advertisers and direct response advertisers and that sort of thing. But what it means kind of through the lens of conversion attribution is a little bit different. And what it really means is that, so imagine that somebody in that gray, sort of slice of the circles there is a converter. So they might have been reached on Yahoo and MSN and CNET and then converted. Well, whichever one of those sites kind of wins the last ad lottery, whichever one of those sites gets to be the last one, gets all the credit. And again, that doesn't take into account the quality of the reach. So if Yahoo showed a piece of video and CNET showed a little text link, and the CNET one was 10 minutes later, it would get all the credit, even though that video probably did more to influence the person's purchasing. So that's another component of engagement mapping, is we want to take into account the user history and allow sites to share credit for a single conversion. So the final piece of research I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to dive into a little bit more concretely what engagement mapping really is this analysis we did called the navigational nature of search. So there are a lot of different ways people use search engines. One way is certainly, you're looking for something very specific, you search on it, and you get there. So imagine that, you want to go to, again, let's use Nike as an example. You search on Nike.com. A lot of people will just type that right into their search bar. So they'll type in Nike or Nike.com, they'll click on the paid link that comes up, and they'll go to the website. So that's what's called branded search. So for those of you who don't work with a lot of search stuff, that's a branded search click. Somebody's searching specifically on a brand name. The other type of search click that we looked at was non-branded search, so somebody just searching on basketball shoes, and that falls into sort of two categories. There are people who click on that for the first time, so they go to their search bar, type in basketball shoes, click on a paid link, and then there are others who are repeat visitors, so they'll use that same paid search link multiple times in their history. And the interesting thing that we found out is that we were trying to quantify how many search clicks were either repeat visits, so somebody just using search to kind of navigate the web, or were clicks on branded terms. So again, still navigating the web, but they knew exactly what they wanted. And the interesting thing that we found was that 71% of sponsored search clicks were navigational. And so that's what's sort of called out here in this table. I'm not going to walk through the entire table, but the idea is that highlighted section there represents 71% of search clicks and about 50% of advertisers' dollars. So imagine that you have, a converter is part of your audience, right? So somebody who's going to convert. You show them advertising, they're interested, and then they use a search engine just to, sort of get to the shopping cart, basically. They just use that to sort of close the deal. I mean, we're back to sort of our neon example. That search click is going to get 100% of the credit. And so that's another thing that we're trying to address through engagement mapping is, again, allowing that credit to be shared across multiple touch points. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to turn and talk a little bit about what a better model for conversion attribution would be. So right now, this is our view of the world. So we've got a converter, we've got that little circle there represents a piece of media. I didn't have room to write out Yahoo, so I just put Y with an exclamation mark. So right now Yahoo is getting 100% of the credit, right? And this is sort of how we look at things right now. But a better model would take into account frequency, for instance. So if there were 10 ads in a user's history, and 8 of those came from ESPN and 2 of them came from Yahoo, ESPN and Yahoo should share that credit, but it should probably be in some sense proportional to how many ads they showed, and taking into account other variables. So frequency we should definitely take into account. All right, so now I've changed the color of the little dots, and then I'm also labeling the dots for different sites here. So this person, let's say they got 2 ads on CNET, 2 more Yahoo ads, an ESPN ad, another Yahoo ad, an AOL ad, and then the final Yahoo ad that maybe they clicked on and went to the advertiser's site and bought something. So we're taking into account frequency, we're taking into account the sites. We'd really like to take into account recency. So this is again a marketing 101 concept. But the closer to a conversion a display type impression is, a passive piece of media, the closer to a conversion is, the more credit it should get, all else being equal. So you can see that CNET here, because it was at the beginning of the window, gets less credit, and Yahoo gets a lot more credit. We should also take into account ad size. So imagine these Yahoo ads are relatively small, and obviously that ESPN ad, we're depicting it as being really big. So that should be something we take into account. The general sort of, gestalt of how marketing works is that larger pieces of media are sort of more effective. So ad size is something we should take into account. There are a bunch of other things that are being taken into account right now. The type of creative, so whether something was rich media or video. For those of you out there who work with video, a video impression isn't probably the same as a 468 by 60 banner. And so our conversion attribution methodology should take into account the quality of those kinds of, those kinds of marketing messages. Interactions, so rich media, there's a number of interactions that we can track, and those can be included. And then also things like order. So order is our term for active events. So somebody clicking on something. And we're able to distinguish, in the user's history, the order on which in which things were clicked on, and give more credit to the initial clicks that sort of got people in the door. There's a whole slew of other things that I'm just going to list here that aren't included right now, but I think in the long run probably will be included. And we're working on some of these immediately. Some of them are probably going to happen next year. Things like day part, when the ad was delivered, day of week. If your advertiser, you're working with McDonald's, say, and they were buying media from you, and you had sold them 10 a.m. to noon, you were giving them impressions then, you'd like them to be able to take that into account as they are evaluating your creative. It's going to make those targeted by time buys look a lot better. There's day of week, how targeted the inventory is, which geographically where the ads are delivered, that's important to some advertisers. And then things about placements, whether or not the ad was above the fold or below the fold. That kind of information can all be included too. So again, the stuff in the first column is what advertisers are going to start looking at now. So as you're listening to this, frequency is certainly something that you have a little bit of control over. Recency, you can't control where a person's going and when they're going to do their stuff in such a direct way. So recency is a little bit less relevant. But ad size is another piece that's very important. So as you start thinking about what your inventory is going to look like next quarter and next year, know that advertisers are going to be using ad size as one of the criteria to share the conversion credit. And so exposing somebody to a larger ad will be more valuable in that history. So let's talk a little bit about what this actually means, kind of where the rubber meets the road. This is how advertisers are viewing campaigns right now. So you can see some sites, advertising.com, Broadband Enterprises, a video site, Google and Yahoo. All this data is I just kind of mocked it up just to illustrate the point. You've got cost, impressions, clicks, and then you've got these last ad conversions, and then from that you can calculate a CPA. And you see, for instance, that ad.com and Broadband Enterprises have relatively high CPAs, and Google has a very low one, and Yahoo is kind of in the middle. So this is the view of the world kind of right now that people are getting. When you incorporate a more holistic model, again, that takes into account all of these different variables, what we'll see is something like this blue box that appears on the right here. the number of conversions will change. The bottom line is the same. So there's still 1,095 conversions for the whole campaign. But the number of conversions that each site gets changes. And so you can see that ad.com has 15% more conversions. Broadband Enterprises gets a lot more credit. And if you think about it, I use them because video is sort of a great concrete example of what's really going on here. It's extremely uncommon for a piece of video, a 15-second pre-roll, to be the last ad. It's often run with companion banners. It doesn't get clicked on. It's not going to get a lot of conversion credit, but it's high-quality reach, and it's part of a lot of converters' histories, and so it sort of deserves its fair share of credit. So, again, what sort of changes here is you'll see, a big swing in the conversions and the CPAs. So advertising.com in this example, the CPA goes way down, and it looks like a much better performer and is much more likely to sort of stay on the buy. And the key thing is that last bullet point. Search is going to share credit for some of its conversions. There's some conversions that search gets by itself, and there's other conversions where display kind of helps it out, and those those converters kind of deserve to have their sort of full story told. So what does engagement mapping really mean for publishers? And I'm just going to kind of walk through these points here. So display is going to capture credit for assisting search. So you as publishers will be evaluated on reaching the right audience with high quality inventory. If you had to summarize this whole talk in one sentence, really engagement mapping is about measuring reach to converters and the quality of that reach. I'm sure there's some of you out there who wish that I had just given that one sentence like 20 minutes ago, and then you could have logged off. But it's really about measuring the reach and the quality of that reach. And you as a publisher, you have a good audience, and you're putting together good marketing messages, and those deserve to have their sort of fair shake. Higher CPMs are going to be justified for better content and better reach. So again, rich media, video, a lot of the emerging media pieces are going to be able to justify a higher CPM, which right now, frankly, a lot of times they can't. Like when we talk to advertisers, they have video or a piece of rich media, they like it, but it just doesn't pencil out for them in terms of conversions. And they still are doing a ton of rich media, but they just kind of know that something's broken in the system. And so we're working on fixing that. Frequency gets its due, so more ads to converters result in more credit, so there's less talk about waste. And then finally, bringing offline dollars online. So engagement mapping based on fundamental marketing principles, and those offline marketers get it and will embrace it. So what does this sort of mean for you in terms of what can you actually do with it? This information is owned by the advertisers who are using the Atlas system, but they can share it with you. So you can just request that the advertiser or the agency share a report. It's very easy for them to do through the media console. And then your existing reports, which I'm going to pull up a little picture of here, you'll see that information populate your existing report, so you can see how you're doing against this new standard. And so that's the easiest way for you guys to sort of, start thinking about these ideas, because the advertisers are, but at the same time, you can start getting some of this data, for any client who's taking part in our beta is going on right now, and you can receive this information. All right, so now we're going to kind of open the line for questions. I've got my colleague here, Young Bean Song, the VP of Analytics, and he's going to sort of scroll through the list of questions. And let's see. All right.
So here's the first question. The question is engagement mapping going to help or hurt the portals?
Okay. So that's a great question. So by the portals, it's kind of the big ad networks, right? So ad.com, Blue Lithium, Drive PM, that kind of crowd. In general, certainly, like any good analyst, I have to answer by saying, your actual results will depend on the advertiser and things like that. But in general, the portals, they have great reach to converters. They have great reach, period, and then by default they have great reach to converters. And so I think what we're going to see is rather than, again, each portal trying to win kind of that last ad lottery, they're going to be delivering more frequency, because right now they're very stringent about frequency capping and things like that. And I think in general the portals will see a large boost actually in conversions, and their cost per acquisition will go down. So they're going to actually look a lot better on the buys than they currently do. All right, next question.
Next question. What implications does engagement mapping have on search and display budgets?
Okay. So right now budgets are heavily skewed towards search. People are certainly doing a lot of display, but they're spending the lion's share of their dollars on search because it has such a sort of quick and easy story to tell. If you have to justify your search budget, it's very easy. Justifying your display budget is harder. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see some of those dollars shift back the other way, and we're going to see display, because you're reaching converters, but you're not that last ad, so you're not getting any credit. We're going to see display start to take up a larger piece of that pie. And then hopefully also, just getting back to the offline-online point, hopefully that pie is going to grow a lot because people will be able to understand everything that's going on. Offline marketers, this is something they totally get, so we'll see more dollars flow in. So the pie enlarges, and I think display will get a larger piece of it.
Next question. What impact does engagement mapping have on CPA deals?
Yeah, so the CPA deal question is a really interesting one. So a CPA deal, somebody says, I'll pay you $10 for every person who comes to my site and converts. Right now, the accounting for a CPA deal is very easy, right? You know what your cost per acquisition is, because it's what you agreed to pay for it. Now that those conversions are going to be shared, we'll sort of start to uncover the true cost of a CPA deal. So I think what we'll see is those deals basically get placed into context. So often they will still be a good performer. You're setting your price. But other sites that contributed along the path will share the conversion credit. So I think that we'll see CPA deals, again, just kind of be placed into context. One more question I think we have time for?
Yep, one more question. This one's a little bit longer. Hold on, let me just read it. Publishers have a challenge with advertisers, which is understanding the rules by which they're optimizing their campaigns. Does engagement mapping make that more difficult and more complex?
One of our goals with engagement mapping has been to make this process as easy as possible. So you're still working with one number at the end of the day, and it's your conversion number. I think that in terms of the actual evaluation, like what number are advertisers evaluating you on, you've still got that one number, so it's not more complex in that sense. But there are a number of variables that are going into it. So I think there's an additional complexity in terms of why did you perform well or poorly. Well, you were reaching converters, but you were reaching them with only text links, and the other sites were reaching them with huge banners. But I think with that complexity comes a lot of flexibility, and ultimately I think it will probably be empowering for people to be able to get compensated not only for reaching converters, and they're getting compensated right now for reaching converters and being the last one, but also for the quality of the ads they're showing people. So there's some complexity there, but I think that in the long run, it's probably a more sensible way to evaluate things. So I think we're about out of time. I appreciate you guys taking the time to walk through this. You got my email there, johncp@microsoft.com, and I'm happy to answer questions online or however we can help. So thanks, everybody, and have a good day.
Okay, thank you, John, and thank you, Young, and thank you all for attending. We'll be sending out a link to this webcast probably tomorrow. It'll also be available at atlassolutions.com. If you have any additional questions about engagement mapping, be sure to contact your account director, and we look forward to inviting you to more webcasts in the future. Thanks.